Section 1, a powder keg, ignited Ukraine and the nuclear threat. The war in Ukraine is not just a regional conflict, it's a global flashpoint. With Russia, a nuclear superpower, directly engaging NATO, the potential for catastrophic escalation is terrifyingly real. The world watches with bated breath, haunted by the spectre of nuclear war. This conflict represents the most dangerous moment in the nuclear age since the Cuban Missile Crisis. At the heart of the crisis lies Ukraine, a nation caught in a geopolitical tug-of-war between East and West. For Russia, Ukraine holds immense strategic and historical significance. For NATO, Ukraine represents a line in the sand against Russian expansionism. The stakes could not be higher. The use of nuclear weapons, even on a limited scale, would have devastating consequences, not just for Ukraine, Russia and NATO, but for the entire world. Understanding the dynamics of this conflict through a nuclear lens is not just an academic exercise, it is a matter of survival. This essay will delve into the historical context of the conflict, examining Russia's objectives and NATO's response. It will analyze the risks of nuclear brinkmanship and argue that dialogue and de-escalation are paramount to avert a catastrophe that could end civilization as we know it. The path to peace is fraught with challenges, but the alternative is unthinkable. Section 2. The Russian bear's ambitions, expansion and the quest for security. To understand Russia's actions in Ukraine, one must look beyond the immediate crisis. Russia's perspective is shaped by centuries of history marked by invasions, territorial expansion and a deep-seated fear of encirclement. From the time of the Tsars to the Soviet era, Russia has sought to create buffer zones along its borders, viewing these as essential for its security. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was a traumatic event for Russia. The loss of empire and superpower status, coupled with NATO's eastward expansion, fueled a sense of resentment and vulnerability. Vladimir Putin, who rose to power promising to restore Russia's greatness, has repeatedly invoked historical grievances and framed NATO expansion as a direct threat to Russia's security. From Russia's perspective, the war in Ukraine is not an act of unprovoked aggression, but a defensive measure, a response to what it perceives as NATO encroachment into its sphere of influence. Russia sees itself as locked in an existential struggle with the West, a struggle in which Ukraine has become the primary battleground. This perspective, whether justified or not, underscores the deeply held beliefs and anxieties that drive Russian policy. Ignoring or dismissing these factors makes finding a peaceful resolution all the more difficult. Section 3. NATO's bulwark countering Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was founded in 1949 as a military alliance to counter the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, NATO's mission evolved to include collective security and crisis management. However, the alliance's eastward expansion after the fall of the Soviet Union has been a point of contention with Russia. Following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its support for separatists in eastern Ukraine, NATO increased its military presence in Eastern Europe. This included deploying troops and equipment to Poland, the Baltic states and Romania. NATO also strengthened its partnerships with Ukraine and Georgia, two former Soviet republics that aspire to join the alliance. These actions, while intended to deter further Russian aggression, have been perceived by Moscow as provocative and threatening. Russia views NATO's presence in Eastern Europe as a betrayal of Western promises and a direct challenge to its security interests. This clash of perspectives lies at the heart of the current crisis. NATO maintains that its actions are purely defensive and that it poses no threat to Russia. However, the alliance's continued military build-up in Eastern Europe, coupled with its support for Ukraine, has heightened tensions and increased the risk of miscalculation. Section 4. American might, the tip of the NATO spear. The United States, as the leading member of NATO, plays a pivotal role in the Ukraine conflict. The US has provided billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, including advanced weapons systems such as Javelin anti-tank missiles and Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. These weapons have proved highly effective against Russian forces, inflicting heavy casualties and slowing their advance. Beyond military aid, the US has imposed crippling economic sanctions on Russia, targeting its financial institutions, energy sector, and oligarchs close to Putin. The US has also rallied international support for Ukraine, isolating Russia diplomatically and economically. While the US has ruled out direct military intervention in Ukraine, it has deployed thousands of troops to NATO countries in Eastern Europe to reassure allies and deter further Russian aggression. The US has also increased its military presence in the Black Sea, conducting naval exercises and providing maritime security assistance to Ukraine. America's unwavering support for Ukraine is rooted in its commitment to defending democracy and international law. However, the US's robust response to Russian aggression risks escalating the conflict and pushing the world closer to the brink of nuclear war.